This is your weekly tech recap with Jamal Abbott. News and insights about the tech world in plain English. Thank you for listening. You have reached episode number 10. We're in the double digits. And this is pretty neat because we got some great stories for you that have happened in the past week. So, our first story that you hear about will be the UK's first 5G deployment by EE. Next story will be about the FCC chair endorsing the Sprint T-Mobile deal. We'll next then hear about the Qualcomm antitrust suit, and then we'll hear about the Senate bill introduced for service providers that need to transition away from Huawei equipment. Finally, we'll end this episode with Q&A. All right, our first story is about the UK's first 5G deployment. Now, EE has the benefit of being the first mobile provider to provide 5G services to the UK. This will be launching on May 30th to 6 cities, and those cities are London, Cardiff, Edinburgh, Belfast, Birmingham, and Manchester. So if you're in one of those areas, you're in luck. You have the opportunity to jump on some 5G services, and to complement that, you'll have access to some of the early 5G devices. So just keep in mind that these devices are going to be limited, with more coming down the road as service comes more available. EE also plans to add 100 new 5G sites per month, and they're expecting the speeds to be between around 100 to 150 megabits per second. And in some cases, some users will experience over 1 gigabit per second speeds on their 5G smartphones. Now, what's interesting about this announcement is that EE has decided to give their customers a little preview of the roadmap to come. So they have a 3-phase approach, with the first phase being now where they're combining 5G assets with their 4G assets. And then over time, they're going to transition to phase 2. Now, sometime in 2022, they're going to move to a next generation 5G network. And this will combine fixed broadband with mobile broadband and Wi-Fi all into one single experience for the customers. And then finally, the third phase, which is going to be taking place in 2023, they're going to be introducing some pretty cool technologies. So technologies such as ultra reliable, low latency communications, network slicing, and then multi-gigabit speeds. So these technologies will enable some future technologies that are going to come into play, such as autonomous vehicles and massive IoT deployments. So this is coming soon, and so just keep in mind also too, they're going to be introducing some 5G home services to complement these services. This will take place in June for the 5G home broadband, and then finally there's going to be some mobile business plans that will complement the rest of the 5G packages with EE. So a lot of announcements, a lot of news that are coming from the EE camp. And this is great for the consumers who are already on this network, or for the people that are looking to transition over to a new mobile service provider. Now, keep in mind that EE isn't going to be the only player out there that's going to be providing 5G services for the UK. So Vodafone has also announced that they plan on providing 5G sometime in June. And then the other mobile carriers, they don't want to be left out of the 5G party. So O2 and 3 will provide 5G services either sometime later on this year or in early 2020. So we'll keep an eye out on this as 5G comes to the UK. So congratulations. If you plan on jumping on 5G services with EE or some of these other providers, let me know. Hit me up, Jamal Abbott. You can reach me on social media. Shoot me an email, jamal@thephoneguy.com. Let me know if you plan on jumping on 5G services. Our next story is about the Sprint T-Mobile deal, and this getting the green light by the FCC chair. So we talked quite a bit about what's going on with Sprint and T-Mobile, how they're currently waiting for the federal government in the United States to approve the deal, and they got a vote of confidence from the FCC chair. So the FCC is the Federal Communications Commission, has 5G as one of their priorities for the country. They want to be able to close the digital divide that's happening in rural America, as well as push the next generation of wireless services in the United States. So they believe that T-Mobile and Sprint will come through with their promises to bring the next level of competition of 5G services to the market, as well as fill the void for some of the lack of broadband services for the rural communities in the United States. Now, with this deal, a new thing has came up about this. So we had talked about how T-Mobile and Sprint were considering some concessions, and then as part of those concessions, one of the new things that came up about this week is the fact that they have decided to divest the Boost Mobile prepaid ban. So if this deal goes through, Boost Mobile will be spun out as its own separate entity, and then there's going to be some other purchaser of that company to actually run that business separate from T-Mobile and Sprint. So that's one of the new things that came about this week. Now, with this being said, even though the FCC is on board with this current merger, we're still waiting for the Department of Justice to actually sign off on this deal. And folks are saying at this point it's a 50-50 toss-up whether or not this deal will actually go through. So we'll keep an eye on this. The FCC is all for this transaction. There are still other people that aren't thrilled with this transaction actually going through. They feel like it's not in the best interest of consumers. Only time will tell who's actually right. We will continue to keep an eye on this as this story further develops. Our next story is about Qualcomm. Now, this one got my attention mainly because it was one of the stories that popped up quite a bit during this week. And the big thing that happened with Qualcomm this week is that a U.S. district judge found that Qualcomm's business tactics violated antitrust laws in the United States. Now, the Federal Trade Commission brought suit against Qualcomm back in 2017 for charging too much for its patents, and that also prevented competition and even innovation to happen in the area of expertise that Qualcomm participates in. Now, Qualcomm provides chips and semiconductors for a large majority of mobile phones and other mobile devices. Now, Qualcomm is against this ruling, and they will continue to fight and appeal this case. But for the time being, agencies have determined that their business practice aren't in the best interest for the consumers, for the market, and they need to change how they're conducting business. Now, this one, I personally haven't kept too close of an eye on Qualcomm and what's been going on with this particular company. But as I mentioned, this story was getting a lot of attention this week, so I decided to do just a little bit of research and see what was going on and then why these suits were being brought against them. And then in my research, I see, according to what's being alleged, it looks like what they're doing is not in the best interest for the market. So for instance, there's not an alternative to a Qualcomm out there because they're able to outbid anybody out there in the market, or they're able to push out the rest of the competition simply for the fact that the competition doesn't have deep enough pockets in order to compete with a Qualcomm. Now, so just kind of keep this in mind if you were forced with just like a Samsung phone. So Apple had no opportunity to provide a smartphone in the market, or even other rival mobile and cell phone companies. If they can't provide those other devices, then the users are left with one device to choose from, and then that one device maker can charge whatever they want, and it's not fair for consumers. I mean, there should be some other choices out there, and I'm a firm believer in competition. I believe when we have competition as consumers, we get the best products, the best innovation that comes out of this, and then ultimately that forces prices to stay at competitive levels, and then therefore you also get the best and the brightest ideas coming because each one of these companies are fighting for your dollars and then ultimately fighting for your business. And that's not happening right now according to these federal agencies. It's not happening right now the way that Qualcomm has cornered the market. So we'll see what happens. We don't know if Qualcomm will ultimately have to change how they're going to price themselves in the market. We don't know if Qualcomm is going to be maybe forced to sell certain parts or aspects of their company. It's kind of hard to say, and especially since I'm still researching this, I don't know for sure what's actually going to happen. What I do know what's going to happen is that some change will occur, and then this will maybe bring in some new entrants into the market, and then there'll be some other companies out there that maybe develop the chips and the semiconductors to provide maybe a more efficient product compared to what Qualcomm is bringing to the market, and then maybe also just bring in some newer innovations that the market currently isn't getting from Qualcomm. So more to come. I'm still looking into this one and thought this story might be of interest to you, especially since it's getting a lot of attention. Our next story involves service providers who are affected by the Huawei equipment ban in the United States. So last week we talked about how the Department of Commerce had initiated a ban on Huawei technology, which prevented U.S. companies from actually purchasing and using Huawei equipment in their networks. So we already learned that Google had distanced themselves and decided that they would no longer provide support and services for Huawei devices, not unless that is either using the open source variant of Android, as well as if they actually get prior approval from the government to work with some of these companies in the United States. And then with that ruling, that has an effect on some of the smaller service providers in the United States that actually use Huawei equipment in their networks to provide services. Because of this change, the United States has decided to give some of these technology companies some time to transition from the Huawei equipment over to other types of equipment, and they're going to be doing this in the way of funding. So there's a bill that's been introduced, and it calls for $700 million to be set aside in the form of interest-free loans, which would be provided by the U.S. Treasury. And then this is specifically for smaller companies that have about less than 6 million customers on their networks. And this is a way for them to get the funding that they need to transition away from Huawei equipment over to some other equipment that's approved by the U.S. federal government. So this story is important because it takes time for equipment to be brought in as well as equipment to be transitioned out. In addition to that, not only do you have the transition costs associated with equipment, you also have training costs and then the cost that it takes for these other providers to learn how to use and then how to deliver the services using this new equipment. So it's going to take some time, and it's definitely going to take a lot of money for this to happen. One of the other things that I've read about these smaller companies that are using Huawei equipment, I understand that it's actually a lot cheaper for these companies to use Huawei equipment compared to some of the other manufacturers of telecom equipment in the market. I think it's a great idea that the government's actually providing the help, especially since this mandate has been put in place, and it's going to hopefully give the smaller companies enough time to transition away from the banned equipment over to equipment that's approved for use. Now, I do anticipate there's going to be some growing pains, and that's going to depend on the service provider and their capabilities and their skill sets. So it's going to take some time before this all goes down, but at least there's a way for these companies to get the support and funding that they need, especially since this has come kind of at a last minute notice. Now, there's been rumors and rumblings about this possible ban for some time, but when it comes to forecasting and when it comes to making decisions about what equipment you're going to use to power your networks, this is a pretty short time to have to make this transition. So hopefully this goes smoothly for the companies that are affected by this, and we'll keep an eye on how this goes. Okay, so we've reached the Q&A portion of the show, and if you want to send me a question, ask me a question, you have a couple different ways of reaching me. If you want to email me, you can reach me at Jamal at the phone guy, and that's THA phoneguy.com. Shoot me an email there, and I'll be happy to answer your question. You can also reach me on social media. The place that I get most of my questions are from Quora, so I'm there, Jamal Abbott, on Quora. But you can also reach me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, wherever you decide to contact me, that's where I can be reached at. So feel free to provide those questions and we'll get them answered on the show. This first question comes from Tom, and he asks, why are telephone calls still the preferred method of communication when we now have free video calls? So Tom, this is a great question, and it's something that is interesting because if you think about it, the phone and the phone calls have been around for over 100 years, give or take. And then these free video calls haven't been around that long. And so I would say that even though video calls are rising in popularity and more people are starting to use these video calls, it's still not as seamless as picking up the phone, dialing, and then being able to connect with anyone anywhere in the world without having to know how that person is using that phone or that device on the other end of that call. So for instance, if I were to pick up my phone, I call you, I don't need to know that you have an Apple device. I don't need to know if you have a Samsung device. What I do need to know is what your phone number is, and as long as your phone is connected to the same public switch telephone network, which most mobile phones, which most landline phones are, as long as I have your number, I can call and we're connected, and then we can start talking immediately. Now with video calls, that's not quite the case, not yet. And then you also have to think about how many different video platforms that are out there and how those depend on either what type of device or what type of network or platform you're currently using. So for instance, if I want to make a FaceTime call with you, I need to know if you're actually using an Apple device. If you are, I get your information, we establish the FaceTime call, and we're connected and we're looking at each other. Now, I love FaceTime too because I think that the video quality is great. The audio sounds crisp and clear, and it's a great call. Now, if you're not a FaceTime or an Apple user, I need to know what we can use that's compatible with our devices in order to establish that call. So I think that's the main reason why we don't have more people jumping on these free video calls, is because we have so many different platforms. We'll just basically call it fragmentation in the market. With the one telephone network, it's one network. Regardless of the device, we all can connect as long as we have phone numbers that comply with that network. With the video platforms, so many different platforms, and we have to know a couple of things in advance in order for us to establish that phone call and to be able to connect with one another. So FaceTime is one example. I'll give you another example too. So it could be a WhatsApp video call. It could be a video call on Snapchat. I mean, you name it. So it could be any number of video calls. Even Facebook has the ability to do video chat. So you have to keep that in mind when it comes to these free video calls. I think we will get to the point to where maybe there might be one form of dominant video calling, but at this point right now, it depends on the user. It depends what they're comfortable with, and that's ultimately going to dictate how much easier it's going to be for that person to make a video call. So they're pretty easy now, but they're not as easy as making a phone call, and the phone calls have been around for quite some time compared to these free video calls. This next question comes from Aziz, and then it asks, how should a business use social media as a tool for customer service? So businesses can use social media as a tool for customer service by really getting to know and really get to understand what their customers are having pains or what issues that their customers are having problems with. Now, if you go on Twitter, for instance, that's a platform that people use quite a bit to voice their frustrations with the product that they have or maybe a service that they're experiencing. There's absolutely no shame in their game for them to say, I'm not happy with this service. In that instance, I can reach out as a business and then establish that conversation with them. I'm meeting them where they're at. And then I think the great thing too about social media is that instead of me being passive and waiting for somebody to call me, I can actually be on the offensive and then reach out to those people, especially if they're having an issue with the product or service that I'm offering. So I like social media as a way for us to go out there and to be proactive with the customer service, as well as maybe even follow up with the customer on their terms on the platform that they're choosing. And so that's not the only way that you can use social media as a customer service tool. There's some other ways that you can leverage social media. Snapchat is one way that you can kind of give them behind the scenes of how your customer service operation is running. So you can do a couple snaps, do a couple videos, and show them how you're doing your outreach with customer service. And so if they get an idea of how you're running your customer service operation, maybe that gives them the encouragement to reach out to you if there's a problem. So there's quite a few different ways to reach out to your customers using social media. It all depends on how creative you want to get. And I think the best way that you can use this tool is just to use it, just to go out there and do it, and then see what works for your customers. See how they respond, see what they like and what they don't like with you interacting with them, and then you can adjust accordingly to their feedback and then provide the best customer service experience using social media based on the feedback you get from the market. All right, and this is a cool question because the person that asked this question, his name is Working Hard. So Working Hard, I know you're working hard. You're working so hard that you didn't even have time to give us a real name, which is cool. No problem with that. And then Working Hard's question is, if I want to disconnect my landline, finally, but want to keep the number for ID purposes with various companies, including credit card companies, can I transfer this number, which is a Verizon landline, to a Google number? So this one's a little tricky, and the answer is yes, but with some additional work that you would have to do to make this possible. I did just a little bit of research ahead of time of this question, just so I can give you the best answer for you. And if you go to the show's episode, the website for this is jamalabbott.com, and then look up episode 10 of the Weekly Tech Report. I will provide a link there for you to go directly to the instructions, and this is from CNET, and they have a nice little tutorial about how you can transfer your number from a landline over to a mobile device. And then with that, then you transfer from Google's perspective, the mobile number over to Google Voice. So the way this is possible, Google makes it easy for you to transfer numbers, but it has to be a mobile number first. So hence the tutorial and hence the steps that you have to go through to actually transfer this number over to Google Voice. So transfer your number using this process. You can do it. It's going to take a couple different extra steps. The one thing I would also warn you about this process to transfer your number, before you do that, please keep your existing landline number in service first. If you decide to disconnect your number first without going through the process of saying, hey, I want to transfer my number from one provider over to the next, you have the possibility of actually losing that number and not being able to have that number transferred over to your next service provider. So keep your number in service, don't disconnect it, And this advice goes for anyone who's trying to transfer numbers from one company to the next. Always keep your existing number intact first. Don't disconnect it. Work with the new company that you want to transfer your services over to, and then they will work with your old company, your old provider, and then get that number over to their network on your device. So, just a quick tip there, and check out that article. You should be able to do it, and then other people have reported success using this couple step method of transferring this landline number over to Google Voice. So I hope this helps, and then if you have any feedback, let me know. All right, so we've reached the end of episode 10 of the Weekly Tech Report, and I want to thank you so much for hanging out, for rocking with me, and then for getting the news that you need from this. So we have 10 episodes of this Weekly Tech Report, and I would love to hear from you on your thoughts on how I'm doing with this. Is there something else that you want from the Weekly Tech Report that I'm not providing? Or is there something else that you want to hear on this show? So let me know. Open to your feedback, and I would love to serve you in the way that you want to be served. So once again, you can hit me up, Jamal Abbott, on all the social media platforms. Shoot me an email, jamal@thephoneguy.com, or you can go to my website, jamalabbott.com, and then you can always hit me up. You can leave a comment on this particular episode. And then also too, if you want to leave a review for the show, go ahead and do that. Leave a review, leave a rating. I definitely appreciate your feedback, and I really appreciate this opportunity for me to help you out along your way and provide you this news. So I hope that you have a great rest of the day. Thank you so much, and I will talk to you again soon.